June 5th. Series is tied 1-1. Game 2 occurred last night. Obviously, Heat won that one by 3. So, John, what are your thoughts thus far in the finals and expectations going forward?
So going into the finals, I just thought that out of every team Miami could possibly face, Denver was going to be the toughest test, not only because they're an amazing team, but stylistically, I think that this is just a really bad matchup for the Heat. I mean, when you think of the Heat, they're a quintessential small ball team. Bam Adebayo is their big man, and he's like 6'9", so you're going up against the Nuggets where they have Jokic, who's obviously 7 feet. Then you got Aaron Gordon, who's like 6'9". Then you got Michael Porter Jr., who's like 6'10". Like, they're a very tall team with a lot of length, to where, once again, with the Heat, I mean, the lineup that they were rocking against the Celtics was Caleb Martin and Jimmy Butler as your forwards. And so even those two guys are smaller than the Nuggets forwards, and so the Nuggets just have a really large size advantage. And also, I think that out of any player that could possibly figure out how to beat all the defenses the Heat have, it would be Jokic, right? Because the thing that the Heat would often bust out against Boston was that zone defense. It would give Boston a lot of trouble. That worked because Boston had some pretty glaring issues with, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum were worse going to their left. The Celtics, they're a very heavy shooting team, and so you start running the zone, and they start shooting a ton of threes because that's what they want. But then if they're not having a good shooting night, like we saw in the Eastern Conference Finals during the last couple of games, then they can't get anything in the paint against the zone, and so all of a sudden things just get difficult. There's just a lot of things that the Heat did to try and beat Boston, right? But against Denver, when you do those same things, I don't think that it's able to work as effectively as it does against some of these other teams because of the Jokic factor. He can pass in any angle to any player doing any kind of thing. They have a lot of good shooters. Jamal Murray in the playoffs is similar to Jimmy Butler, that he becomes a man possessed and just outperforms his regular season stats pretty heavily. And then even against any sort of defensive coverage, the toughest part is always going to be Jokic can just kind of back you down in the post and once again use that big size advantage and go score if he wants to. So, yeah, I was not at all surprised by the Game 1 results, where Denver, I mean, they only won by 11, but in reality, it wasn't as close as the score would make it seem. Miami had a little bit of a late game surge to make it a little bit closer, but for the most part in Game 1, Denver was in control throughout the game. And then in Game 2, I thought it would go the same way. Miami came out to a strong start in the first quarter, at least, but then Denver kind of claws back towards the end of the first quarter, and they make it a little bit even. And then the second and third quarters, Denver was, controlling the lead. I mean, it was a little bit closer in the third, but Denver was still holding that lead that they had built in the second quarter. But the fourth quarter, Miami came to play, and you got to give a big shout out to Jimmy Butler, Gabe Vincent, Bam Adebayo. Those guys showed up big time offensively. So I would say I was surprised that Miami was able to stop Denver, but it was interesting because in reality, Jokic did not struggle, right? Like, the guy had 41 points, 11 rebounds. But what Miami was able to do was prevent everybody else. Jokic with only 4 assists is a pretty shocking thing to see. Now, Jamal Murray did have 10, which is not common. But very clearly, Miami was able to switch up the defense a little bit to force Jokic into more of a scoring mode, which obviously he's going to get his buckets there. And I don't know how that's going to work the entire series. And that turned Jamal Murray into more of the playmaker. But even then, a lot of those assists were just going to Jokic. So it seems like Miami did a really good job of limiting everybody else after Jokic. Now, can they do that the whole series? I don't know. We'll see. But at least so far through the first 2 games, those are my thoughts. I think a lot of people are really excited, at least on the Miami side, of, oh my gosh, they took a game in Denver. But I think, as we've seen in the NBA, honestly, the whole, like, you took a game at the other team's home court never really is actually like that huge. Like, obviously it's important. It does put the pressure on the opposing team now. But I mean, like, Miami, like, they lost 2 games against Boston on the road or at home. When they were in that 3-game skid after going up 3-0. So, like, it's very possible that Denver is going to just go out there in Miami and just take one back. So, yeah, those are my thoughts so far. What about you?
Yeah, you mentioned the size advantage in game one, and I agree that was extremely prevalent. I mean, early on, I forget, first half, like Aaron Gordon had I know he had double-digit points, but he was getting a lot of, points in the paint. And then credit to Miami, they adjusted. I think they started throwing more Jimmy on him because he was just, I think initially they threw Gabe Vincent, Max Strus. As good as those guys have been, I mean, Gabe Vincent, point guard against, like you mentioned, 6'9", 6'10" Aaron Gordon, who we all know can jump out of the gym. That's a tough assignment. And then, Max Strus, obviously similar build, but he was undrafted for a reason. Is because, probably not, a great athlete, but obviously a great basketball player. But, in terms of that matchup, Gordon ate there. So that was an interesting little chess match. And that obviously helped kickstart them in game one. And you mentioned Jamal Murray. I think game one we saw he was definitely more efficient scoring as opposed to game two, where I think the Heat had a better game plan to limit, like you mentioned, his scoring. Fine, let Jamal be a playmaker. That's not who they're worried about, making plays. And like you said, game two is just okay. We'll let Jokic cheat, but we're gonna focus on everyone else, making life tougher on them. For them, I will say Michael Porter Jr. too. He's kind of hit a rough patch, which I did not expect because going into this series he was shooting really well. And game one he got a lot of good looks. And I think I would say so in game two as well. It's just he hasn't been knocking them down. So, I don't know. I saw that quote he mentioned in the bubble about, how they were just chilling, pina coladas after every game. Maybe, a change of scenery to Miami may help. I fortunately don't have his splits home and away. But I will say, just for the numbers percentage, regular season, he shot 37.5% from three. And as of this finals right now, he is shooting 17.6%. So for the Nuggets' sake, I'm guessing I think they just have to hope that he gets back on track. I think it will help too that if Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is not in foul trouble, because he's also a huge contributor in terms of spacing the floor and being a reliable knockdown shooter. And game two, he was dealing with a lot of foul issues. And I think that's the other point I want to get to is that Mike Malone mentioned after game one, it wasn't their best night, it wasn't their best effort, and he definitely emphasized that point after game two. And I think that kind of showed I know the Heat didn't make a lot of threes in game one. That's one of the reasons why they lost, but they did have a lot of good looks. So I think the key for Denver in game two, obviously, they made those looks as we saw early on. I mean, it was Max Strus in the first quarter had I think 11 or 12 points. Gabe Vincent was great throughout. And then there's that one Duncan Robinson stretch. But for that example, on the actual play where he was, mean mugging the crowd, I guess you could say, it was a miscommunication there because I think they were supposed to switch. It was I think it was Braun and I know Braun was for sure because he had messed up the play earlier too, where they both went after Duncan. He was sitting corner and gets a screen to go up towards the kind of middle of the court, but both times he kind of cut to the basket. Obviously, second time he got the basket, but the first time, bam, just threw it to Gabe Vincent because I want to say Bruce Brown and Christian Braun both went after the cutting Duncan Robinson and left over Gabe Vincent. So I'm sure that's definitely one Mike Malone will be emphasizing, just things like that. It's not just physical effort, it's mental effort, knowing your switches, things like that. And, knowing the rules of how to defend certain actions that Miami will throw at you. And that's one of the credits I do want to give Miami. It hasn't been I'm not going to try using that word, a crazy effort by Jimmy Butler like we saw in the first two rounds where he was dropping, 40, 50 points. It's kind of been pedestrian, but he's still been making plays on both ends of the court. And then it's just been the role players that have been, stepping up. And I know Jimmy probably hates that we're using it, or I'm using the term role player, but, the Gabe Vincent, who's shooting 57% from three, looking like, almost like Patty Mills and Danny Green when, for my Spurs. But, just little moments like that, I have to give the Heat credit and really Eric Spoelstra for finding ways to, I guess, keep the role players engaged in different forms of the offense. It's not all about, hey, Jimmy has to score 40. There are other ways we can score, other ways we can put stress on your defense. Even when Jimmy goes 7 for 19 or wherever his stat line, I know he was extremely inefficient in game two. So, and the only other thing I want to add in terms of for the Heat is I would like to see them attack the paint more. I just felt like going into this series that would be an advantage for them because Jokic is, I would say, an average, rim protector. But yeah, I felt like, especially game one, they settled for a lot of mid-range jumpers. And I'm pointing mainly at Jimmy because he's usually the one, when they run the pick and roll, he's usually the ball handler. And Jokic is usually how the Nuggets have been defending it as Jokic is just chilling in the paint, make the layup tough, but live with the mid-range. But hey, I mean, attack maybe a little bit more. See if you can get Jokic in some foul trouble too. That would help, obviously, for the Heat. But yeah, so those are my little things thus far this series. Yeah, but I'm with you. I think the Nuggets are definitely the more talented team, obviously. But I think as opposed to your Celtics, which obviously we'll talk about later, I think they're a more cohesive unit, especially on offense. I feel like their offense does flow better, even if if Jokic, if Jokic isn't dropping a million points. It's like you mentioned, Jamal Murray can go nuclear. We've seen Aaron Gordon contribute a lot, and if Michael Porter Jr. can just get out of the shooting slump, their offense becomes that more dangerous. But anything else you wanted to add?
On my thoughts so far, not really. If we wanted to move into like what do you think is going to happen the rest of the way? Obviously, we're tied 1-1.
I had Nuggets in 6, and I'm feeling more confident in that now. Obviously, the Tyler Hero factor is going to be interesting because he hasn't played basketball in about a month. I know he's been doing on the side, but as we all should know, very much so different when you're getting thrust into the finals and playing the Nuggets. It'll be very interesting defensively what they do with Hero, because I feel like that could be a matchup that the Nuggets could attack. Test. Okay, Tyler, like I said, you haven't played basketball in about a month. Do you know all the rules on how to defend us within as a team, or are you gonna make mistakes? And then even offensively, will Tyler Hero be effective, or is he going to be inconsistent? And if he is going off, how do the Nuggets defend that exactly? Because so far it's really been, I feel like, Jimmy Butler as the main facilitator. I mean, I know Bam has a little bit, but Jimmy Butler's been the main threat in terms of driving and such. So I think that's a definitely next factor. But I'm still confident in the Nuggets. Like I said, I can't. Like I said, I think if Michael Porter Jr., even if he does continue to struggle, I expect some of these other guys, the Bruce Browns and the Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, I expect one of those two to pick up the slack if he does continue to struggle. So, yeah, I'm still confident in mine, but I am glad that we got a series now. And I mean, I could still see the Heat win this whole thing because, I mean, I feel like they're like a zombie, just unkillable. But what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm still skeptical on if Tyler Hero is going to be able to come back. He was supposed to come back game 2, didn't happen. It's indicated he might come back for game 3. But I don't know. And like you said, I'm still not fully sure how he's going to play when he does come back. And it's obviously going to shake up the rotation quite a bit because honestly, the other guys have kind of stepped up a lot in his absence. I'm not saying that you don't want Tyler Hero to come back, right? But you want him to come back and him to actually be ready and, good to contribute, because if he comes back and he starts playing poorly, well, that's going to eat into the minutes of Vincent and Strus and Caleb Martin and some of these other guys who have all been performing really well so far. So, yeah, I don't know how much he really changes the series for me. I was on the same boat as you. I thought Denver in 6. I do think that regardless of all the advantage they have, at some point, Miami, they're just a very scrappy, well-coached team. I do think Spoelstra's the better coach. That's no shot at Mike Malone, because I do think that Spoelstra's probably the best coach in the whole league right now. But you got him.
I'd agree.
Yeah, I mean, Jimmy Butler's been obviously on fire, and he just has some of those games where he can go drop 45. We haven't seen that yet in this finals, but he can do it. And so I thought they'd maybe take 1 or 2 just off of Jimmy and Spoelstra, maybe get a crazy Bam game, or like I said, Vincent or somebody else steps up and does what they did in the Boston series. But yeah, I'm still pretty confident Denver takes this one in 6. I think that in game 3, regardless of whether Tyler Hero comes back or not, I think Denver's going to respond, and I think they're going to take it. That's going to put Miami's backs against the wall. Once again, you got to defend your home court. You can't go 0 for 2 in Miami, give them a 3-1 lead. That might make them desperate, and they tied up 2-2. But then I think from there, I could see Denver, cleaning it out. They go back home, get the 3-2 lead in Denver, and then they finish it off in Miami, something along those lines. So, yeah, I agree. Denver in 6. Wouldn't be shocked if it was Denver in 5. Like I said, I think that Jokic and that offense are just. I mean, I don't know. I just think that the fact that they lost by 3, and like you said, we're seeing Michael Porter Jr. not really have the greatest of starts. I think he's going to turn that around at some point. We're seeing, Jamal Murray didn't have the greatest of shooting nights in game 2. I know, especially late, there were some questionable moments there for him. Only 18 points for him in that game. That's not necessarily normal for him in the playoffs so far. And even some of the other guys, right, like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope only had 6 points. Aaron Gordon only had 12. I think that some of those guys are going to step up and contribute a little bit more. And the fact that Jokic only had 4 assists, I don't expect that to continue. I think that's probably a low point for the series. So, yeah, I'm in agreement. I think Denver probably takes it in 6.
Yeah. And yeah, I just want to emphasize that he said Murray. I think that'll be very interesting to see if Mike Malone and that coaching staff can figure out just more ways to get him going in game 3 and 4, and find more ways to attack that elusive Heat zone. Because it's not because I think, like you mentioned, when Jokic is on the floor, he can eat up that zone. That's no issue. It's just when Jokic is off the floor for those 8-10 minutes, or even if that, of rest. Okay, can Jamal Murray and the rest of this game, can they figure out how to kind of dissect this zone, which at times isn't even really a 2-3 zone. It's credit to Miami. It's, I don't know. Sometimes they I think JJ Redick mentioned they kind of morphs into like a 1-3-1 at one point the other night, and sometimes they kind of just play man. It reminds me a lot of like kind of the Seattle scheme in football. I'm not saying they're Legion of Boom, but even yes, they cover 3 majority of the time, and most people know the weaknesses, but they know the weaknesses of the zone as well, and they can kind of anticipate if you're trying to attack those and kind of throw some curveballs at you. So, yeah, even though the series is tied 1-1, I am in agreement with you. I just feel like this is the Nuggets really to lose. But we'll see, because the Heat have kind of been defying odds all postseason. I'm not gonna say all season, because it was a very disappointing regular season for them.
Yeah, let's not forget that this Heat team lost the first play-in game to Atlanta. Like, they were literally a game away from not even making the playoffs, and so
and they were down against Chicago with like 3 minutes. Like, I know it was down 3 points, but they were on the ropes with 3 minutes left against Chicago for the second play-in game too.
The only series that The only parts of this playoffs that I really thought the Heat were going to do it was against the Knicks, to be honest. Against the Bucks.
Sorry, Knicks.
Yeah, sorry, the Knicks. But against the Bucks, right? Like, they had the best record in the whole NBA. Nobody expected that to happen. Handled them pretty easily. The Knicks happens against the Celtics. Yeah. I think a lot of people had the Celtics as the betting favorites. I'm pretty sure they were the betting favorites. Last year the Celtics
saw the ESPN percentage.
Yeah, which, by the way, I hate that ESPN percentage thing.
Yeah, that's because it's a little overblown.
As a Celtics fan, that's now 2 years in a row that I've seen it be so far heavily favored for Boston against the Warriors and now the Heat, and then it goes like the opposite way. And it's like, I don't know what algorithm you guys got going on over there, but I don't understand why it's so heavily favoring the Celtics. Because I don't know, although I did expect the Celtics to beat Miami, we didn't record an episode before it, but my prediction was Boston wins in 7. Like, I thought if we beat them, it's going to be a dogfight, because that's the exact same thing that happened last year. It went 7. Now, obviously, it still went 7. Boston just didn't win it. But yeah, so I don't know why it so heavily favors them. But regardless, the point being, Miami is very well accustomed to being the underdog. Now, obviously, one little difference here for Miami compared to some maybe other underdogs is that their 8th seed is a little different compared to a normal 8th seed. Like, I wouldn't say they're a normal 8th seed, right? Like, last year they were literally the 1st seed in the whole Eastern Conference, and
basically the same roster too. It's not like they did a huge change.
I think the only notable loss was PJ Tucker. Like everybody else is the same. And you lose PJ Tucker, but like Caleb Martin has started to step up more. Gabe Vincent, I think, has improved compared to last year. I mean, last year you didn't have Hero either, so it was kind of the same thing. So yeah,
Kevin Love. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, you added Kevin Love, I guess.
Apparently, I will say I did read a report where, like, apparently they've all been singing the praises of Kevin since he came in. Like, he's helped change the attitude. So maybe it's that, every championship team, or not every, but most of them, they have some sort of veteran presence. I think most of us thought it would be Udonis Haslam, but I guess Love is maybe a little bit of a different sprinkle in there.
I mean, listen, I would say Udonis to me would probably be more of like the hard mentor type of like, he's going to tell you how it is kind of a guy. To where Kevin Love, I saw somewhere, and I don't know if this is actually true because I didn't fact check this, but I don't see why it would be incorrect based on my memory. Every time he's made the playoffs, he has made it to the finals. Based on that thing I saw.
That is, I have seen that stat, and that stat is, it's on ESPN, so I'm assuming it's true. If not, then you can point the finger at ESPN.
And I mean, it would make sense because in the Minnesota era, he never made it to the playoffs, I don't think. And then he goes to Cleveland, and obviously they were competing for the finals every single year. And then once LeBron left, they stopped making the playoffs altogether. So obviously, but then now his first time going back to the playoffs since. He's in Miami, so I think it makes sense. But just having a guy who has that kind of experience of like, he's been around a lot of deep runs, whether he was heavily contributing like he was in Cleveland or now, just partially contributing as a role player. The experience of having those deep runs, I think, can help with the kind of team. Obviously, a lot of these guys have been to the finals, but it was in the bubble. They haven't been in like those hostile environments in a deep playoff run into the finals until this year, I would say. Obviously, they still were going to the Eastern Conference Finals and all that, but I think that like this helps guys like Max Strus and Gabe Vincent and all those undrafted guys, just the stuff that Kevin Love can bring with the experience he's got tagged on with Udonis. But anyway, my point was that overall, I mean, even I'm doubting the Miami Heat still. They've continually proved me and a lot of people wrong, so I wouldn't be shocked if they continued to do it.
Yeah, so I guess we got to sit and watch and see as now the series shifts over to Miami. So we'll see if, if that plays a factor and what adjustments both teams make going forward.